Today, we're digging into a figure who is just a huge paradox at the heart of 20th century science, Sir Arthur Eddington. On one hand, you've got this brilliant astronomer who helped prove Einstein's universe was real, but on the other, he believed that same universe was made not of matter, but of mind.
And that's the central mystery we're unpacking today. How could the guy who gave us the very first hard evidence for general relativity also believe that reality, at its core, wasn't physical at all, but spiritual? It sounds impossible. To figure it out, we've got to meet both the scientist and the mystic.
Okay, so first things first. Eddington, the scientist. And let's be clear, his scientific credentials were, well, unimpeachable. He wasn't just around for the birth of modern astrophysics. He was one of its main architects.
I mean, his career was just this incredible series of game-changing moments. That 1919 eclipse expedition, it made him a global celebrity. By 1920, if you spoke English, he was the guy explaining Einstein's wild new ideas. And then in 1926, he publishes The Internal Constitution of the Stars, basically the rule book for how stars work, a book that's still important today.
But that 1919 expedition, man, that was everything. You have to picture it. World War I has just ended. The wounds are still fresh. And here comes this British Quaker setting out to prove a German physicist's theory right. And he does it. By measuring how the sun's gravity literally bends the light from distant stars, he gave the world the first tangible proof of general relativity. It was a huge moment for science, a total win for evidence.
And just to really hammer this home, his scientific work was all about meticulous math and hard data. If you read his technical papers, it's all differential equations and thermodynamics. You will not find one shred of mystical language in there. By every professional standard, he was a hardcore empirical scientist, which of course makes the other side of him so much more surprising.
Because this same hero of empirical science held a belief about reality itself that was, frankly, radical. See, Eddington was a devout Quaker, and his faith wasn't just some Sunday hobby. It was the philosophical bedrock for how he saw the entire cosmos.
Now, a key idea in his Quaker faith is something called the inner light. It's this belief in a direct, personal experience of truth, an inner knowing that doesn't need a priest or a sacred text to validate it. For Eddington, this wasn't just a religious idea. He thought it was a legitimate way of knowing things, a kind of intuitive pipeline to a much deeper reality.
And here it is. This is where he makes his most jaw-dropping claim. In 1927, he writes this sentence, and it sent absolute shockwaves through science and philosophy. The stuff of the world is mind stuff. What in the world does that even mean?
He meant it quite literally. Eddington was arguing that consciousness, what he called mind, wasn't some lucky byproduct of a material brain. No, he believed it was the fundamental fabric of the universe. In his view, the physical world that science measures, all the atoms, the energy, the gravity, was just a set of symbols, like a coded message pointing to a reality that was, in its very essence, spiritual.
So, how? How does a person hold both of these ideas in their head at the same time? Well, Eddington wasn't a hypocrite, and he wasn't confused. He actually built a very rigorous philosophical bridge to connect his two worlds.
He called it twofold knowledge. Think of it like this. First, there's symbolic knowledge. That's science. It's the world of numbers, measurements, equations. It gives us an incredibly powerful map of reality, but it's still just a map, right? It's symbolic. But then there's intimate knowledge. That's our direct personal experience of being conscious, of feeling joy, of seeing beauty, of finding meaning. For Eddington, you absolutely needed both maps to understand the universe.
This really shows you how he kept his thoughts organized. When he was doing astrophysics, he was all in on the scientific method. It had to be rigorous, mathematical, empirical, no exceptions. But the reason he was doing science, his deep-down motivation, that came from his philosophy. It came from that inner quest for unity and meaning.
And he was very blunt about keeping the two separate in practice. He wrote that it's just a tidiness of mind to keep religious ideas out of scientific work. He made this great comparison. He said a businessman might believe in providence, but he wouldn't list divine providence as an asset on his company's balance sheet. It just doesn't belong there. Science and religion had their own jobs to do, and mixing them up just made a mess of both.
So when you put it all together, you see that for Eddington, science wasn't the enemy of spirituality at all. It was a critical part of a spiritual quest. That act of seeking truth, that was the sacred thing that connected both. Science gave him the coded map of the universe, but it was his inner, intimate experience that told him why the map mattered in the first place.
So what do we make of this incredibly complex person today? Well, his legacy is this fascinating, messy mix of massive wins, big controversies, and questions that are still so relevant.
And look, he wasn't always right. Not by a long shot. When a young physicist named Chandrasekhar did the math and showed that huge stars could collapse into what we now call black holes, Eddington famously and publicly dismissed the whole idea as stellar buffoonery. History, of course, proved Chandrasekhar right. But what's so important here is that Eddington's objection was based on his physics, not his faith. It just showed that he was a fallible scientist, not some religious dogmatist.
So his legacy is really this mixture. Half of it is his heroic, unquestionable contributions to astrophysics and relativity. But the other half is split between his really controversial philosophy of mind stuff and the years he spent chasing a fundamental theory that, in the end, just didn't pan out.
As you can imagine, the reception to all this was all over the place. His peers, guys like the philosopher Bertrand Russell, they basically thought his mystical stuff was charming but fuzzy nonsense. But the public, they couldn't get enough. They bought his books by the thousands, hungry for a vision of science that still had room for awe and meaning. And today, a lot of people look back at him as a fantastic model for how to bring faith and science together without compromising either one.
And maybe this quote just says it all. For Eddington, the answers were never as important as the search itself. That restless, unending quest for truth, that was the sacred ground where science and spirit could actually meet.
And his life really leaves us with a huge question for our own time. Eddington dared to ask what science was ultimately for. In our age of hyper-specialization, have we gotten so good at the details that we've lost the big picture? Have we gained precision but lost our sense of purpose? Has the search for data replaced the search for meaning? That's the challenge Arthur Eddington's legacy leaves for us.